I join all present here in offering my condolences to the people of Karnataka and to people of India on the passing away of a great saint. Honorable Minister for Social Welfare, Government of Karnataka, Shri Kharge ji, honorable participants in this very important seminar and friends. I thank the Government of Karnataka, Samruddha Bharat, which has initiated some very good work, and the NDTV for inviting me to inaugurate this important conclave. Important because it is relevant to the current public discourse in our country, and also because its success would have a huge impact on our future. Emotional and mythological discourse apart, record shows that throughout its long history, India surfaced as a unified political entity only through the persuasive power of a hegemon initiated and sustained, at least in initial period, through the use or threat of force. The ancient practice of Ashwamedh testifies to it. Others adopted more direct methods. Once sovereignty was established, the ruler was expected to observe the Kautilyan principle of ruling justly and according to the laws. So, until the establishment of British hegemony, the Indian landmass was a collection of individual states in varying power equations with each other and with a dominant political force whenever it existed. Our freedom struggle was a people's movement with participation from all parts of India. Hence the opening lines of the preamble of our constitution, "We, the people of India." The objectives resolution of January 1946, proposed by Jawaharlal Nehru, visualized a decentralized federation in which the states would retain residuary powers. Yet, there is no mention of federation in the Constitution. Proclaimed in November 1949, and India is described as a union of states. This union is indestructible and has a single citizenship. The Constituent Assembly, it has been said, produced a new kind of federation to meet India's peculiar needs. Ambedkar described it as federal in normal times and unitary in extraordinary situations. The principal concerns at that early stage was physical integration, and the framework of Article 246 and its list 3 lists in the 7th schedule were considered adequate for what later came to be called cooperative federalism. Any discussion on federalism has to consider both its intrinsic worth and its practical necessity. So the analysis has to be twofold: of institutional mechanism and its efficacy in actual practice. The Canadian scholar W.A. Livingston had noted in 1956 that the essential nature of federalism is to be sought not in the shedding of constitutional and legal terminology, but in the forces, economic, social, political, and cultural, that have made the outward form of federalism necessary. Federal government is a device by which the federal qualities of the society are articulated and protected. A sociologist has drawn a distinction in conceptual terms between federalism as a social contract resulting in settled rules of the game and as a negotiation involving mobility between several positions. He has opined that federalism has to be a negotiation and not a social contract, a to and fro between positions, places and choices, adding that negotiation does not freeze choices except when the language of the time entrusts the text of federalism along with space. It is the politics of diversity rather than of homogeneity. Scholars have identified three types of regional challenges in the functioning of Indian polity: those emanating from militant movements, those based on assertions grounded in underdevelopment, and those grounded on the general principles of devolution of power to states. Given these perceptions, it is not surprising that the subject of state autonomy and of center-state relations has been raised from time to time. The political context has been the emergence of regional political parties, the changing power equations between the center and the states, and the impulse emanating from the former towards the creation of a consensus on nation building through a strong central government. More specifically, as an informed scholar has inquired, how far does federalism in India temper majoritarian trends within our democracy? A look at the progress of this debate makes interesting reading. I shall mention 10 points. 1. The States Reorganization Commission in 1955 spoke of internal cohesion and regional consciousness and recommended linguistic homogeneity, but with some exceptions. 2. The 1971 Rajamanar Committee report of the Tamil Nadu government made a critical analysis of the strong center concept. It emphatically favored maximum autonomy to states, touched upon areas of legislative competence through redistribution of entries in the 7th schedule by constitutional amendments, and recommended obligatory consultations with states in regard to matters affecting their interests. 3. The 1972 Anandpur Sahib resolution of the Shiromani Akali Dal sought to recast the Indian constitutional infrastructure and be given a federal shape by redefining the central and state relations to safeguard the fundamental rights of religious and linguistic minorities and fulfill democratic traditions and pave the way for economic progress. 4. In December 1977, the West Bengal government published a memorandum on center-state relations. Its suggestions included A. Replacement of the word union by federal, B. Repeal of Article 356, 357 and 360, and C. Mandatory consent of state government for the formation of new states and alteration of areas, boundaries or names of existing states. The then Chief Minister urged that a strong and united India can only be one in which the democratic aspirations and distinctiveness of the people of different states are respected and not treated with disdain. We all are definitely for strong states, but on no account do we want a weak center. The concept of strong states, he continued, is not necessarily in contradiction to that of strong center once their respective spheres of authority are clearly marked out. 5. The experience of several decades, particularly in the late 1970s, generated discontent at the center's role and led in the year 1983 to the appointment of the Sarkaria Commission to review the existing arrangements between the center and the states while keeping in view the social and economic developments that have taken place over the years, taking into account the importance of unity and integrity of the country for promoting the welfare of the people. Its report in 1988 observed that while the union-state relations were intended to be worked on the basis of cooperative federalism and consensus in all areas of common interest, they have not been so worked, and the forums envisaged by the Constitution for that purpose have not been established. It drew attention to excesses of centralism made over time through the use or misuse of Article 256 and recommended that it be used very sparingly in extreme cases as a measure of last resort when all available alternatives fail to prevent or rectify a breakdown of constitutional machinery in a state. 6. In February 2000, the Venkatachalaya Commission was mandated to examine as to how best the Constitution can respond to the changing needs of efficient, smooth and effective system of governance and socio-economic development of modern India within the framework of parliamentary democracy, and to recommend changes, if any, that are required in the provision of the Constitution without interfering with its basic structure or features. On the executive role vis-a-vis the Constitution, its report in March 2002 restricted itself to the selection and the role of governors, the working of the constitutional machinery in a state, and the invocation of Article 356 by the federal government. In these areas, it by and large endorsed the recommendations of the Sarkaria Commission. 7. In the Punchi Commission in the year 2010 came to the conclusion that cooperative federalism will be the key for sustaining India's unity, integrity, and social and economic development in the future. The principles of cooperative federalism, it said, thus may have to act as a practical guide for Indian polity and governance. India today has reached that stage of development when statesmanship should lead politics, where no one hand the national goals and objectives are where on one hand the national goals and objectives are fully respected by the political parties and the federal constituents, and an equal amount of consciousness and support is shown in addressing the needs and aspirations of the states and the different communities by the Union. 8. The Sarkaria Commission had drawn attention to Article 263 of the Constitution and recommended that the Interstate Council visualized in it be instituted. This was done in the year 1990 through a presidential order. It has met 12 times in the past 28 years, and its standing committee, chaired by the Union Home Minister, has met with greater frequency. In the last meeting of the Council in July 2016, Prime Minister described it as the most important platform for strengthening center-state and interstate relations. It had on its agenda the recommendations of the Punchi Commission and the use of Aadhaar as an identifier for disbursement of subsidies, benefits, and public services, improving the quality of school education and internal security and intelligence coordination for combating terrorism and insurgency, police modernization, and police reforms. Its proceedings remain confidential. Its purpose and potential remains clearly underutilized. 9. The question of financial relations between the center and states and the claims of imbalance is a perennial one. Article 280 of the Constitution mandates the setting up every 5 years of a finance commission to recommend measures and methods on how revenue is to be distributed between center and states, and the principles for giving out grants in aid to states and other local bodies. In the last meeting of the Interstate Council, the Prime Minister announced that with the acceptance of the recommendation of the 14th Finance Commission, the states' share in the central taxes has increased from 32 to 42%. The terms of reference of the 15th Finance Commission, the current one, have been criticized by some of the states, alleging that these are against the spirit of fiscal federalism, since the decision to use the census data of 2011 instead of the 1971 data weighs against the states where growth of population has slowed down to below 16%. And they have named Kerala, Andhra, Punjab, West Bengal, Odisha, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka. And that it gives undue benefit to some other states where the range of growth is between 20 and 25%, namely UP, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Bihar, Jharkhand, and Chhattisgarh. This has wider implications since over decades and for a variety of reasons, the capacity of the states to finance both revenue and capital expenditure for their own tax-based resources has declined substantially. And my 10th point, notwithstanding its intent, the devolution of authority and financial autonomy to local bodies through the 73rd and 74th Amendments of 1993 has not realized their objectives, since state governments have been reluctant to implement them. The devolution they seek for themselves from the center does not seem to get reflected in the devolution that local bodies should get in terms of the constitutional amendments. It is therefore clear from the above that, firstly, discontent with the functioning of our cooperative federalism has existed for several decades, and secondly, that institutional correctives put in place have not been sufficient. This, in the context of the ground reality of political parties of different persuasion coming to power in the states, has the potential of tensions that would not be conducive for smooth functioning of cooperative federalism and may, in fact, result in unforeseen developments. Friends, the challenge to the polity and to its citizen body is therefore twofold. Firstly, to register the points of stress, examine them objectively in terms of existing realities in the power structure, and secondly, to factor in the imperatives of the national economy, the unity of the market, and the development objectives. The current state of public and political discourse in the country does add a sense of urgency to the consideration of these questions. The secrecy surrounding the discussions in the Interstate Council and its standing committee on the specific recommendations of the Punchi Commission leaves room for speculation rather than informed debate on intricate matters like fiscal transfer to states, goods and services tax, and center-state fiscal relations. An initial point of commencement could be a clear enough definition of the term cooperative. In formal terms, it was defined by the American scholar A.H. Birch as the practice of administrative cooperation between general and regional governments, the partial dependence of the regional governments by the use of conditional grants frequently promote developments in matters which are constitutionally assigned to the regions. But a more pragmatic description based on the Canadian experience is that it is a matter of political compromise and administrative pragmatism based on a network of relationships that exist between various executives and public representatives of the central and provincial governments, through which relationship mechanisms are created and which allow a continuous redistribution of powers and resources without recourse to the courts or the amending process. Above all, the intergovernmental relations in a federal system should work on three principles. 1, democracy. 2, justice and fairness. And 3, efficiency. How have these broad principles actually operated in our case? The first, meaning democracy, implies open consultations under an agreed framework. This, as suggested by the Sarkaria Commission, is the Interstate Council. Some guidelines for its functioning, erring on the side of excess, were suggested in 1990 by the then Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu. The Commission's other recommendations on the selection and role of governors has been largely ignored by successive governments. The imperative of democratic governance suggests that their full implementation has also greater regularity in the consultations process of the Council. The second principle touches a critical question in any federal arrangement. This relates to the allocation of financial resources. The operative mechanisms in our case are the Finance Commission, the central government allocations through other mechanisms, and the new GST procedures. The latter is working on the basis of consensus and the weighted voting system, one-third for the states and one-third for the center, I beg your pardon, and two-thirds for the states. This suggests an effort at democratic cooperation. The principle of justice and fairness has also to extend to, firstly, allocation of earnings from natural resources, and secondly, water sharing. Over time, both have led to a good deal of anguish and anger. With regard to the first, it is evident that the contribution of mining and quarrying sectors is higher in some states when compared to the national average. But despite their mineral wealth, these states are economically weak and in many cases have per capita income lower than the national average. Since the Constitution has assigned functions, legislative competence, and fiscal powers to both the center and the states within their domains, perhaps a solution lies in the establishment of independent bodies to determine competing claims that should go beyond royalty payments to the longer-term impact of mining on ecology and on human development of the concerned populations. This also holds for the sharing of water resources. Many of our rivers traverse more than one state, leading to conflicts, and the resolution of these water disputes is essential for the functioning of India as a federal state. Water is both a union and a state subject. Figures in union list as well as in the state list of the 7th schedule of the Constitution, as also in Article 262, pursuant to which the Interstate Water Disputes Act of 1956 was enacted, covering disputes relating to the waters of rivers Krishna, Godavari, Narmada, Kaveri, Model, Mandovi, Mahadevi, and Vansadhara. This mechanism of tribunals and higher court judgments has not worked. Neither have political negotiations. The Sarkaria Commission had recommended that there should be a time limit for the disputes referred to the tribunals, and that the awards of the Supreme Court should be binding on the states. Needless to say, the efficient functioning of these mechanisms should depend on the investment of political will. To sum up, therefore, in a polity as large, diverse, and complex as India, efficient functioning of the federal structure created by the Constitution is a substantive safeguard for democracy and must be nurtured. This would require continuing adjustment and accommodation, as also an informed and discerning electorate that can distinguish between local or regional and national issues and is not swayed by periodic, unitary and majoritarian impulses, be it in politics or in imposing a single cultural denominator to homogenize a plural society, since both can upset the balance of our society and subvert the very idea of India. A long time back, friends, when I was a college student, I read about a great statesman of ancient world who was very proud of the city he lived in. And he said in an oration to the citizens, "Look upon the beauty of your city day after day till you fall in love with it." Let me say this about our constitution. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, sir, for those inspiring words. If I could please ask you to just stay on for one moment, and I could ask the Honorable Minister for Social Welfare, Mr. Priyank Kharge, to please present you with a token of our gratitude. Thank you so much, Mr. Ansari. Thank you, Mr. Kharge. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we will begin with our first session.